as a living legend, Dr. Anil Kakodkar,
Thank
one
you.
of the fathers of India's nuclear program, India's Oppenheimer. So the pressure of keeping this thing a secret, it must have been almost like sort of a spy movie, right?
And then he quietly told me, sir, we have to run now from here. Dr. Kalam has been a great leader and a great team person.
There's a famous story that when you were driving there, your Jeep broke down and you had to create a fan belt yourself.
Now in the desert, you have only sand and these bushes. So finally I pulled up some twigs from those bushes, cleaned them up, loosened the fiber, twisted it, and made a rope and sort of made a belt out of it.
When George Bush was finally there to sign, he looked up and said, "You're that Dr. Kakodkar who's been, are you happy now?"
And it looked to them that the stumbling block is Kakodkar. So maybe that story must have reached him. Everybody was introduced one by one. So he said, "Oh, you are that Kakodkar."
Hello everyone, welcome to the India Story podcast, which keeps on looking at how you can take the India story forward. And of course, energy is going to be one of the keys of that. How does India get enough energy to really fulfill all of its ambitions? And we are joined now by somebody whom I would literally describe as a living legend, Dr. Anil Kakodkar.
Thank
One
you.
of the fathers of India's nuclear program, one of the people who was there both in 1974 and in 1998 when India tested nuclear devices, the former chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, the person who's had a vision really of how India can have a nuclear future. Dr. Kakodkar, it's a real privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I was talking about India's energy ambitions. Now we are seeing what's happening with oil and gas. We are seeing how you're struggling to get oil. India needs to grow. India wants to move towards Viksit Bharat. India needs to give enough energy to all of its people. And you, among others, have spent your entire life saying that cannot be done without nuclear power and nuclear energy. Do you still believe that today?
Yes, absolutely. Because let's look at this way. The energy, even in a natural course, it goes through several transitions. We had older time energy from water, energy from burning of firewood, then coal, oil, gas, and they all go through a peak and then decline depending on the resource depletion. Now, in the same process, nuclear energy comes maybe after the hydrocarbons and all. And that's because Earth resources are kind of finite. Within these finite resources, how can you get maximum energy? And nuclear energy is a very concentrated, very high intensity. So per gram or per kilogram of a nuclear fuel, you get maybe tens or hundreds of million times more energy compared to, let's say, oil or gas. And that is required. So even in normal course, it will be a necessity. But then with the issues of global warming and things like that, the whole process has got accelerated because you want to move towards clean fuels.
Dr. Kakodkar, yes, India is going to need a lot of energy. But, if you're looking at it, and it should be clean energy because obviously you can't go on polluting. But a lot of people will say that nuclear, even in the best case, the ambition is 100 gigawatts by 2047, and right now it's 8-9. Solar and and wind capacity is already, more than that. So there's a certain view that the energy future will be solar and will be wind, not so much nuclear. Maybe you could explain what the specific role of nuclear is going to be in that mix.
First, the total resource potential of different energy sources. For example, if you put all renewable energies together, solar, wind, bioenergy, even hydro, including large hydro, it will come to something like 8,000 terawatt hours annually, and which is about the energy we consume today. So clean energy transition with the energy consumption as of today Now the question is, if India wants to get into that state, developed country status, then we require additional sources. And nuclear does give that sources. Now you're absolutely right. This is sort of ambition is one thing, what is the ground reality? And certainly the program has got delayed. And there have been reasons for that. Primarily, it's a sensitive technology. Nobody gives you the technology, and then India has developed this completely on its own. So it has its own consequences, delay being one of them.
Technology and all have been an issue. You, of course, one of the people who was very instrumental in the India-US nuclear deal, which I'll come to a little later. Has that technology flow become a little easier now?
We at least have a waiver by NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. And that means the general commerce, nuclear commerce, we are getting integrated. Now, nuclear being sensitive, it will still be a decision by country.
Sir, there are two aspects to it as to how you proceed. And both of them, I think, you played a role in both of them. One is getting the technology, making sure that you have the best technology and getting help, including from abroad, in increasing the nuclear load. And the second is the question of fuel. So let's do each by one. First is the relationship with the rest. Now, you were one of the people who was the most instrumental in the India-US nuclear deal. But it didn't really go too far forward, and not that many reactors came in because of issues around civil nuclear liability and so on and so forth. What has just happened with the Shanti bill and others? Maybe you could just explain that to us. Is it going to solve that problem?
I would imagine so. See, post the civil nuclear cooperation agreements with different countries, one thing was, of course, the Liability Act did dampen several things. But I think the main reason why things didn't really move forward is the cost. The India's reactors that we built within the country, pressurized heavy water reactor, the per megawatt capital outlay is the least in the world.
Private sector has been allowed into atomic power, which perhaps you wouldn't have thought was possible, back in the day.
No, it was not that. It was only expected. I myself opposed private sector when the civil nuclear cooperation had just opened, because that was not the time to do this. Because first is there were a lot of reminiscences of the so-called non-proliferation mindsets. So India was seen as a pariah country. Secondly, private sector. I always felt that they should get some experience, because running a nuclear business is not the same as running any other.
The risks are higher also if you're for a nuclear accident.
Well, accident is one part, but there is a fuel cycle linkage. Now, fuel cycle linkages will still remain with the government. So, and in fact, we'll face those issues even post-Shanti Act, because the fuel cannot be left open, because, see, whatever technology comes from outside or fuel comes from outside, we have agreed that this will be put under IAEA safeguards. Now, that of course is a commitment of the entity concerned, but it's also a national commitment. So, there is going to be that challenge. But I think country will learn. I think it has been liberalized to the maximum extent possible under the circumstances.
I'm going to keep using this occasion to try and get some of the stories, because you were in the room literally when a lot of the major events in India's nuclear history was happening. So now that we're talking about the Indian, the India-US civil nuclear deal, is that story true that, when George Bush was finally there to sign, he looked up and said, "You're that Dr. Kakodkar who's been, are you happy now?" Just tell us that story.
No, what happened is, this was when President Bush came to India after the 2005 Apex meeting in Washington. So this must be 2006, 2007, something like that. Now, 2005 declaration was the kind of principles were articulated, and then a lot of negotiations followed. Now, that negotiation followed. The question was that basic principles were it was recognized that India is a responsible country with advanced nuclear technology.
I'm trying to get the personal anecdote on this because I believe, Dr. Manmohan, when this conversation was happening with you, because you were the person who had very strong views on that, you actually wrote down what India's red lines were on a paper napkin. Is that a true story? What happened there?
Yeah, so this was President Bush episode was a little later. This was in 2005 when the first summit took place. Now, so these principles which are saying, those are under kind of discussion. One had to be very careful about the wording of this because ultimately the devil is in the fine print. So even as the Indian delegation landed in Washington, there was a disagreement on the Indian side when we were discussing this latest draft. So everybody says, no, now we should accept and all. I expressed the view that no, this still requires improvement. Prime Minister, he asked everybody who was in the delegation. There was me and Mr. Narayanan, who was the National Security Advisor. So Narayanan supported me. But by and large, everybody else said that no, we should not let go such big opportunity from our hands. And so when I expressed an opinion that no, it has to be further improved, it so happened after a lot of discussion, quite a heated discussion. But Prime Minister said, he backed me, that country's future is involved and we can't bind ourselves into difficult things. So he said, no, see if further improvement is possible and all. Now, that was the previous day night. Then overnight again, some bilateral dialogue took place between the two foreign ministry people. And next day morning, again some new draft came, which was an improvement. And so I was called by Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. Natwar Singh was there. Only three of us. They again asked me that, look, this has come now. Now what do you say? So I said, this is an improvement over yesterday's thing, but you still need to do something. So again, they said, what is all this? Finally, they told me, and this was the time when they were moving out for delegation talks and things like that. So there was very little time. So, but Prime Minister was clear. He says, unless Kakodkar says yes, this will not go through. So that is the time I was asked, what do you want? Now, we were just standing, it's called. So it was not that we were sitting as a meeting with preparation and nothing, no papers. I said, now, write down what exactly, which way you want it changed. So the only paper available was a tissue paper on the table. So I picked up a paper and wrote the formulation. And then they went back. And finally that got cleared.
The Americans accepted that?
Yes.
And then what happened when George Bush was signing?
President Bush, this was when he came, the next round. And at that time, there was kind of issues with respect to what I was telling earlier. That was no difficulty to put things coming from outside under safeguards. But I had serious difficulty about whatever we built on our own, why should we put it under safeguards? Particularly when it's a technology in development, because if you put it in safeguards, it will be subject to oversight by inspectors. Now, inspectors, the way they work is you write down a plan and then you carry out the work exactly according to that plan. And if there is a deviation from that, you have to again stop, negotiate that part. Now, you can't do R&D like that. So I said, look, new development cannot happen under this framework. So there can be no inspectors breathing down our shoulders for.
So you got them finally to accept that. So what did Bush say when he saw you?
So those become very hard because US wanted, there was a question of dividing the civil domain and military domain. So they were looking at that, no, you tell why it is to be military domain. And I had said that, look, it is not for you to decide what is military and what is civil. That determination will be done by India. And once it is determined that something is civil, we will put it under safeguards. Now they wanted to get maximum things into this civil domain so that it will get safeguards. And I wanted to make sure that maximum thing remains outside that domain. So there was, obviously, for me it was a national interest. So this discussion went on for a very long time, and particularly the issue was the fast reactors. Anyway, to cut the long story short, so even as it was time for President Bush to arrive, these negotiations were still going on. So obviously, in the American camp, there would be that unease as to whether things will happen or not happen. And it looked to them that the stumbling block is Kakodkar. So maybe that story must have reached him. So when the formal delegation, I was introduced, everybody was introduced one by one. So he said, oh, you are that Kakodkar.
Are you happy now?
Are you happy now?
What did you say?
Yeah, by that time it was settled.
So, all of this actually, I want to come back to the nuclear future and obviously thorium, which is something which is so central to everything which you said. But the crux around why nuclear was held up for a long period of time was exactly what you just referred to, the military dimension that was introduced,
yes,
which then led to sanctions and India becoming a pariah and the rest of it. First round, when the Canadians cooperated and Tarapur happened, everything was okay. Then came 1974, when India tested a nuclear device. You were actually in Pokhran when that happened. I think you were perhaps one of the very few people who was there for both the nuclear tests, right? Both in 74 and in 98. So the pressure of keeping this thing a secret, it must have been almost like sort of a spy movie, right? I believe you had to dress up sometimes in army uniforms and Did you ever think that they were going to discover it? What was the closest that...
Well, it has... there have been... what shall I say, very close rushes on that count. I'll give you some anecdotes. Once, of course, one is to act in a manner that you don't leave any trail. Secondly, whenever you're anywhere around Pokhran, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, that area, we were all in military uniform so that you don't see a lot of people in civilian clothes there. So at that time, even if you're moving to see something connected with the work, so there was also a oil exploration company which were doing work close to India-Pakistan border, a place called Tanot. They were drilling shafts and they were drilling, because this test also, it had to do a lot with drilling to keep the shafts, to make the shafts. So as an engineer, I had the curiosity to figure out, well, what technology they are doing, what are their challenges and all. So 3-4 of us, we went there. Of course, we were in uniform. Now, it so happened that this was, of course, not 74, 98, but the issues are similar. It so happened that that company had people from Dombivli, a suburb of Mumbai. And now I didn't know those people, but they could identify me because
they recognized you.
Because atomic energy in Bombay, senior people are known. So one of those people, he took one of my colleagues aside He said, look, that man looks to be Kakodkar. Is it so? He said, no, he's not Kakodkar. And then he quietly told me, sir, we have to run now from here. And
You were in military
I
uniform.
was in military uniform.
And I believe all of you have told you can't put on weight because somebody with a very big pot belly will be very noticeable as not being from the army.
Yeah, no, luckily, we've been maintaining reasonable figures.
No, I'm talking about everyone who was in the team.
Yeah. So such challenges have been there all along.
In the first challenge, of course, so the difference between the two tests would have been that 74 must have been lot less equipment, lot less resources. There's a famous story that when you were driving there, your Jeep broke down and you had to create a fan belt yourself.
Fan belt in the sense, the base camp was at Pokhran, and the actual site where the test was to be done was about a couple of hours into the range. And then, of course, it goes through those sand tracks and things like that. Now, the jeep in which we were traveling from that base to thing, somewhere in between, it kind of broke down. So he figured out that the fan belt has broken. Now, the normal conclusion is you have to get a fan belt from the base. Now, that to get, you have to send message. There are no, 74, there were no mobiles or any such thing. So, it would take maybe 1.5 to 2 hours to go and tell the right people that we need a fan belt. And then they will locate. So, another half an hour, 45 minutes. And then another 1.5 to 2 hours. The whole day would have gone. Now, we were racing against time, so we can't afford to lose that day. So, now what is the way out? Now, in the desert, you have only sand and these bushes. So, finally, I pulled up some twigs from those bushes, cleaned them up, loosened the fiber, twisted it, and made a rope. And sort of made a belt out of it. Now I knew this is not going to last any long, but the hope was that at least the remaining journey will be able to complete. And then after that, while we are working, this can happen. Luckily, that worked.
That coming back to that moment, everyone, a lot of people, I don't know if you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, everyone's seen the movie about, America's first nuclear test and what was happening there. What was the atmosphere in 1974 when India conducted the test? As one of the people in the room, you're one of the most junior people at that time. I think they called you baby or something like
Baby of the year, correct. Baby of the team.
Baby of the team. What was the atmosphere there inside, and maybe you could describe it to us?
No, the question is, such teams have to be necessarily kept lean and thin. You can't afford to have too many people because then maintaining secrecy becomes difficult. And so multitasking becomes a very important thing. It's not as if there is a task, so you get the person who knows that task best. You have to have an overall picture and whosoever. So the team builds that camaraderie in the team, the kind of that feeling for camaraderie which I have seen both in 74 and 90. You can't build that kind of atmosphere when simply because the stakes are high, everybody is charged, something important for the country is happening. And that, I think, is something which I'll remember. So it was a small group, but we will solve the problem. And it just moved on that basis.
We are seeing now how countries are almost saying that if you don't have nuclear weapons, you are vulnerable. We've seen that happening. North Korea is not attacked because it has nuclear weapons. Iran would have been saying maybe we should have built it earlier. Ukraine would be thinking the same. In 1974, did you have that feeling that this is something really critical that we are doing for the country?
Yeah, although, mind you, 1974 was a peaceful nuclear explosion experiment. So it was not a weapon test. It was an experiment. And the purpose was, at that time, just to let the world know that we have comprehensive programs on use of atomic energy. India had still maintained a posture of being working on atomic energy only for peaceful purposes.
1998 was more definitely India's now developing nuclear weapons, and there was no
Yes.
ambiguity around it.
Yes. See, in the sense, I have always described India to be a reluctant nuclear power. The decision and there is issues with both of them. So that now before that, of course, several trials were done that weaponization, make the package rugged, compact. Some flying tests were also done. The designs were ready when the decision was made to sort of come out in open as a weapon state. The idea was then we must conduct tests which will ensure India's nuclear deterrence for a fairly long time, because you can't do this every now and then. So the matrix there, the 5 tests that were done, was decided on that basis.
And it wasn't just the fission bomb or the atomic bomb, it was also the hydrogen bomb or the
Yes.
thermonuclear bomb. And
Yes.
that took also people by surprise that India has got that capability, thermonuclear. So, you know, again, I just want to come back to the sort of, I know Dr. Kalam was there, so you were describing the camaraderie and the atmosphere, you know, when the test was happening. What was your relationship with him? What was the sort of bonding? What did you say to each other once the test was successful?
Well, first of all, my excitation potential is not all that low, so I don't get excited very easily. So,
You just built not just an atomic bomb, but a hydrogen bomb, and you said you were not that excited. I mean, you've tested
no,
it.
in the sense, see, the point is, you have been working on this for a long time. And now, this is a final test, of course, but the question is, if your understanding is right and if you have done things right, it has to work. So it's a final confirmation of that you have done. So, according to me, excitement comes when you get to know something which you didn't know earlier.
So you were that confident that it would work.
Yeah, of course. But talking about Dr. Kalam, Dr. Kalam has been a great leader and a great team person. So, of course, and I knew him even earlier. But post-test, there was no difference that he is heading DRDO, we are in atomic energy. Those borders had melted away completely.
So it was a strong working relationship
Yes.
that you had. I mentioned the movie Oppenheimer, and it's interesting because I've heard you and Dr. Bhabha both sometimes deferred to as India's Oppenheimer. In the movie, they have a sort of an ambivalent relationship to this thing that has been created, right? This atomic bomb, because it is a weapon at the end of the day. Did you ever feel any of that in your own mind, or did you say that this is something that is essential for national security?
Well, I had no conflict in my mind whatsoever. And I must tell you that I belong to a Gandhian family. My both mother and father have, in fact, lived in Gandhi's ashram, part of freedom movement and all. So there was, of course, I couldn't tell anybody before the test that this is what I'm going to do and whether I'm right, wrong. There was no such opportunity. But there have been always this general discussion every time that Hiroshima, Nagasaki Day, the debate flares up. And I also participated in a couple of those events. Coming from atomic energy, people would invite me and got into a debate for and against. So I had done that. After a lot of soul searching and trying to figure out the ethical parts of it, I have come to this conclusion that technology, whatever, weapons technology, military technology, civilian technology is technology. What is bad is what goes on in human minds. And I think the Indian philosophy that way is far, far superior compared to other cultures. Now, regardless of how one may view nuclear weapons, India's position has always been towards total nuclear disarmament. And that has been a policy right from beginning, and it continues even today. Of course, it's not going anywhere. Nobody is going to do that. Now, the question is, short of total nuclear disarmament, how does India ensure its security? The only other way, you have your weapons. So I had no conflict whatsoever.
So till there is nuclear disarmament, you have to have the nuclear weapons to protect yourself. India does have two nuclear adversaries, China and Pakistan both. And I'm sure you must have spent a lot of time also thinking of what could be the repercussions if there actually is a nuclear war. Now, fortunately, after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there hasn't actually been a nuclear attack. But you must have spent some time thinking about what happens if there is a nuclear attack. What if there is a nuclear war?
Yes, so I think war fighting with nuclear weapons and war fighting with conventional weapons, they are not the same. They are two completely different things. Nuclear weapons are weapons of deterrence. Now, nuclear war will take place when the deterrence are broken down. So that means the conduct on whatever the two adversaries on both sides has to be such that deterrence stands. So that's why Kalam used to describe nuclear weapons as weapons of peace. That is, you want to guarantee that, even otherwise deterrence. In Cold War times, many times we have heard this. Yes. That you want to make sure that there are no nuclear wars, you must have your deterrence stable and working.
Just coming back to the tests for a minute, there was after the tests some controversy a little later when some members of the team said, did they work completely correctly? Was the thermonuclear device sufficient or did it fizzle? And you and others have reacted very strongly to that to say that the data is there. Maybe you could just talk about that a little bit.
No, there was that controversy, and and this has been happening. Even in 74, there was controversies as to whether the yield was what was being claimed. And 74, it was more of the foreign players. Now, I have noticed this, and the source for them to say that, basis for them to say that, would be they would carry out seismic measurements in their own labs, which may be several thousand kilometers away. And they behave as if you interpret those seismographs and work out a yield, there is sanctity to that estimate. So, same thing happened in 98 as well. So, by 98, I was fairly senior. I was, in fact, director of BARC.
Yeah.
So, I said, I must settle this once for all. And the first, whatever you would read out of your seismographs, it's a function of how much is the yield and how that energy is coupled to the ground, because then only it can get transmitted. And then, of course, the transmission characteristics of the path. So, we said that we must have a code, a computer code, which can simulate this phenomena. And this is it's a very high strain rate phenomena, in the sense things which are happening very fast. So the properties are different. It's not very easy. Until that time, nobody had done a three-dimensional simulation of the rapid ground movement post such a test. So I told my colleague that, look, we must have this code ourselves, because, to answer all these questions, the key would be that, and whether you are able to model that ground movement and show that what has happened is consistent with what the model is. So that was done. Uh, and I said that we'll publish it in a peer-reviewed international journal so that there is authenticity to this. Now, the question was when this was done and sent to a journal, they kept on asking many, many questions. How did you get that? Well, there is, first of all, they should see the contents, the logic and the formulation, and obviously it was clear that the reviewers were from one of the weapons lab. And I found while this was going on, in their House magazine, a news story came about that they are developing a similar code. So I had to get the editor to commit that yes, they will record both the date at which it is communicated and date at which the paper was accepted. And so that the credit that India has done this first time, then others have followed. So
but at the end of all of that, has it now been scientifically established that the tests were successful, it was a thermonuclear device?
No, let me tell you. So this is only about the yield part. See, one of the issue was the Pokhran site had only 2 big shafts, and that too fairly close, just 1.1 kilometers. So you couldn't do tests in these 2 shafts separately, because you do test in one, the other will get damaged. 5 kilometers from site, there was this village Khetolai that had a population at that time of around 5,000 people. Now, the important criteria that we had to necessarily meet was that those houses cannot be damaged. A little crack here and there is okay, but there can't be a collapse. And that is something was my responsibility. So after doing estimates and all, we concluded that up to around 60 kilotons is what we can maximum release in the test, both the tests together, because they have to happen together simultaneously, to ensure that village Khetolai is safe. Now, one of the tests had the standard weapon, fission weapon, because as I told you, which has this configured, and so that is what we wanted to qualify. So that was 15 kiloton. So the balance was 45 kiloton. So whatever you want to prove about thermonuclear capability, it had to be done only with 45 kiloton yield. And that also, what do you mean by a hydrogen bomb, just 45 kiloton? Hydrogen, everybody thinks it will be 200, 300 kiloton or maybe longer, higher.
Megaton range.
Megaton range. So this was one source, but we had limitation. So the first step was to be able to model the ground movement. The second step was one carried out drilling and recover samples and then measure carry out an assay, what kind of radioactive species are there. And there are some species which are a clear signature of a fusion reaction. So that was identified. Similarly, in fact, you can also identify the yield from there. So when all this was done, and we published all that.
Dr. Kakodkar, those have really been some fascinating stories about, what happened in 94, 98 and the civil nuclear deal. Let me just come back now to energy, nuclear energy. Part of the problem of, the dual use and the sanctions and all of that is led to the problem about fuel. And I think one of the things that you have been championing for decades and decades is India needs to worry about the nuclear fuel, because there's no point being self-sufficient in the technology if somebody can switch off the uranium supply, which India has very little uranium. India does have a lot of thorium. Is that something which you think is a strategic imperative? You have to shift to thorium.
Yes. See, the point is, the only naturally occurring fissile species on Earth, a nucleus which can fission and release nuclear energy, is uranium-235. There are other fissile species, but they are man-made. For example, plutonium, uranium-233 and all. So anything about nuclear has to begin with uranium which is available in nature, and this uranium-235 is 0.7% fraction. The remaining fraction is uranium-238. So it is clear that a nuclear program anywhere, it has to begin with uranium reactors. Now, and today that's how globally most of the nuclear programs are uranium based. But that uranium is being used in what is known as once through mode. In India, we actually said that once through mode of use is not tenable. We believe in closed fuel cycle. If you are talking about, you take total world's uranium, and our reactors, most of them easily run for 60 years, 70 years, some even longer. So let's take this 60 year. And if you take total uranium and say that the reactors in which it will be used have a life of 60 years, then how much of capacity, nuclear energy generation capacity, you can sustain with total uranium in the world for a period of 60 years? And that number is only about 500 gigawatts for the whole world.
So if you're only using uranium and you're not recycling it, then there's not enough uranium, not just in India, but anywhere in the world to power nuclear energy. Which is why, and this started with Dr. Bhabha, right? Way back, there was this view that India has got millions of tons or a lot of thorium. Let's find a way that we can do a 3-stage cycle, I believe it was called, that we can start using thorium.
So what Dr. Bhabha said was that was specific to Indian condition, that since our uranium resources are very, very modest, let us recycle. You start uranium reactors, whatever number we can set up with the uranium that we have, take the spent fuel, remove plutonium, put it in fast breeder reactors. Now, as I told you, this conversion takes place both in thermal as well as fast. But fast breeder reactor, the fissile material that you produce is in fact more than fissile material you consume. So it actually creates new fuel. So if you do that, then you can expand the nuclear reactor capacity in the country. And the Kalpakam reactor, which had just gone critical, is the beginning of our second stage, and we should be able to expand that to a much larger capacity. And that is required because then if you have large capacity of such platforms, then you can irradiate thorium there and produce large quantities of uranium-233, and then you can run uranium-233 thorium in a kind of self-sustaining mode.
So the question, though, that will be asked is, and I'm just sort of getting the timelines into my head, if this 3-stage process was Dr. Bhabha's dream, so when you would have just started off, maybe he would have discussed it with you and said, this is the sort of things that we are, wanting to do.
Not discussed. See, I joined the department, and within less than a couple of years, Bhabha was no more. So although I have met him some, I was very low.
Yeah, you were at that time like the sort of intern just starting off sort of a thing. But I'm just saying, it's the 3-stage process is a dream that goes back decades.
Correct.
It's taken a long time to build those pressured heavy water reactors. Now the first of the fast breeder reactors has just gone. If we are going to wait for more and more fast breeder reactors to come and then the thorium reactors to start, that could take decades, right? 20, 30 years more?
Yes.
Maybe more than that?
So that is precisely my worry, in the sense, see, we had done everything right, but the time is not on our side. And more particularly, see, if, say, global warming issue had not erupted, Then, of course, we have plenty of fossil energy, coal, oil, of course, we import, but we also have some domestically available. And we could have gone on to make transition to nuclear whenever it is ready. Today, that is not the case. 2070, we have to make this net zero, clean energy transition. So, which would mean that the energy security of India has to be assured essentially by way of use of clean energy, renewable, nuclear, like that. So that is the challenge. And to do this, and by that time, the thorium energy system should have become large enough to hold the burden. We can't have at that time a new reactor.
The target is 100 gigawatts by 2047. So obviously you can't wait for 30 years or 40 years for all of these reactors to come up. So how do you accelerate it?
So at least my proposal is we still follow Bhaba's game plan by and large. Only thing is, see earlier the first stage, PHWR stage, was expected to be only 10,000 megawatts. Now we are already about there, 8.8, in another year and a half, we'll cross 10,000 megawatt, all uranium reactors. So whatever we're supposed to achieve during the first phase, although there is time delay, but we would have achieved. So you have enough raw material to go to for the fast reactors expansion and the 3-stage program implementation. Now, because we have access to imported uranium, we are talking about 100 gigawatt. 100 gigawatt, most of it is to be fueled by imported uranium. Now, 100 gigawatt also represents a large enough platform for irradiating thorium to convert. So, no, thorium can be irradiated in fast reactors as well as thermal reactors. Fast reactors, fissile material breeds. Thermal reactors, fissile material doesn't breed. So it will not be as efficient as it would be in fast reactor. But you can breed or you can convert sufficient thorium into uranium-233. Now that you have this fleet of 100 gigawatt PHWRs. Now, so we should start irradiating thorium-based fuel in PHWRs right away. 10-15 years down the line, we should have the design of a thorium reactor ready. And the fuel coming out of this first stage can straight away go to thorium reactors. And in the meantime, the second stage will grow, more fuel will come out, because that's a fuel factory. Fast breeder reactor is a fuel factory.
I see.
And then it can connect it. So the only thing is you have to bring the third stage closer in time and connect it with the first stage, and the second stage will link up.
So if I understand you correctly, and I think it's a great idea. So you're saying that the first stage is more or less ready. You already got the capacity. Don't wait to build out a fleet of fast breeder reactors, because that will take 20, 30 years by itself. Start irradiating the thorium already in the first stage reactors, so that your fuel then is ready. So you can go straight to thorium reactors in 15 years.
Correct.
Did I summarize that?
Correct, absolutely right.
Is that something that hopefully people are listening to and we are planning to do or thinking about?
Well, it's a debate going on. See, thorium is a difficult technology. Now, but the question is, that is what we are committed to solve. Thorium is fundamental to India's energy independence.
We have enough thorium to keep us going virtually forever.
We have so much thorium that it can meet the requirements of India as a developed country, which I mentioned. On top of it, we can export energy to other countries. And we can actually become just like the Middle East countries or OPEC countries. They have their prominence because they are the energy suppliers of the world. Through thorium, we can become that.
We have 25% of the world's supply of thorium.
Correct. Correct. So it's a huge resource. Only thing is, it is not that you use and start using. You have to go through that process, and there are challenges. But those challenges must be solved, and it's not as if we don't know how to solve that challenge.
We can get international help also. I believe there's an American company also working on a thorium-based fuel.
Yeah.
They've named it after you, I believe. Anil is what they call it.
Well, that's good, good on their part. But the point is the following, that international collaboration is important because first is this will require irradiation of thorium. Thorium we have plenty in the country. But to drive the reactor, it will require uranium, enriched uranium. And in this case, slightly higher enrichment. So it's called HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium.
There's also talk about other types of technology, small modular reactors, for example. And there's a view that maybe that's the path to go. I mean, all across the world, the need for energy is being felt, not just because of the Iran war, but because of AI and the sort of energy that AI is going to require. So there's a view that maybe, all of these reactors are fine, but we have to move much faster. So small modular reactors are becoming increasingly the talk of town.
Yes. Now, see, globally, SMRs are currently under discussion. Talking specific about India, India's additional energy requirements are one of the largest in the world. So, India's nuclear energy program, the prime component has to be large reactor. That should be clear. Because, if you do small reactor, this number itself will become unmanageable. But having said that, there is an important niche area for small modular reactor.
Well, Dr. Kakodkar, it's really been a privilege talking to you. But I just wanted to end by sort of a lot of the legacy. A lot of people don't know that the amount that you're doing right now with NGOs, with the social sector, in a sense, are you going back to your own childhood? You were mentioning your parents a short while back. Your father was imprisoned, I think, by the Portuguese for 9 years. Your mother, brought you up. Very, very humble beginnings. Do you think back to that period a lot right now as you are thinking of your legacy?
Well, that legacy has been with me all along. See, somewhere towards the end of my career in atomic energy, in the sense, earlier we were talking about the first stage, PHWR technology, then fast reactors, and then thorium reactors. Now, thermal reactors and fast reactors, there is some work going on abroad. On thorium, there is not work. Now, of course, it will start in other countries, but I didn't see the priority of other countries for thorium. So that would be an area where India will have to do new technologies on its own. This one also is, difficult to access, so we developed it on our own. But the fact is, it is more of the technology which was already existing somewhere. We are not preparing our youth to be ready. Now, of course, we talk about innovation, startup, that culture, which is a very good thing which is happening. But even so, there are 3 domains where we have to prioritize. So one, what I said just now, you must have capability to bring new impact-making technologies to the world ahead of others. It's only then our economy will grow in competitive terms. It's only then we'll get strategic advantage, variety of things. Second, we should address the core Indian challenges. For example, we're talking about energy and nuclear energy. So these are big ticket items. And the third is whenever economy grows, it contributes to disparity. There is almost a nexus. Economy grows, disparity also grows. Now, disparity is the source of instability in the society. Now, you want India to be a kind of stable democracy with right-minded people, whatever that right-minded means. Want to do that, as a minimum, because disparities are in various forms. It's not as if urban areas there are no disparities. But today, of course, you have to go by 2011 socioeconomic and caste census. After that, we don't have data. But the rural domain per capita income is roughly half of the urban domain. And larger population still lives in villages. So obviously, by definition, larger number of young people are also in villages. And they are all migrating to cities and all. It's another matter. So I am convinced, more than convinced, that for India to grow, we have to focus on our villages. And that...
Very similar to what Dr. Kalam also used to say.
Yes. And that is not just the, one development is brick and mortar development. Roads, wells, school buildings, hospital buildings. That is happening. It is already happening. I think what is not happening in an adequate measure is the human resource development in true sense. That's why I talk about silage and all. So that is what I am up to.
But Dr. Kakodkar, the final then question that I will leave with you is that, it's not that that Indians aren't doing great things and building a lot of technology, not necessarily here. 90 unicorns in the United States set up by people coming from India. Part of the challenge is, when you were at the University of Nottingham, I know a professor looked at you and said, why are you going back to India? Stay on here. You'll become a professor here. That was an option before you. Instead of working in the, at the Bhabha Center here or heading the Indian, Atomic Commission here, if you'd gone to the United States and done something, you may have been a billionaire or a trillionaire or whatever it is. How do we get our brightest and best to say that we will come back here and work for the country?
No, I think you have to create an ecosystem where young people are able to fulfill and address their passion, whatever that passion is. And I think it's happening. There are more number of people returning from foreign countries today than
Why
earlier.
did you do it? And did you ever regret it? Did you ever say that I've come back and I'm beating my head in the system?
No,
Maybe I could have done something else somewhere else.
I had told my professor right then, because I finished my master's. I was wanting to come back. He says, why you want to come back? You continue with me. You finish your PhD and I'll make you faculty. I said, no, I have to go back because that's where So he in fact offered me saying that, okay, by the age of 28, if you do not occupy a position which is equivalent of a professor in a university, you come back. Wherever you are, whatever you have done, I'll make you professor here at 20. He had put that line. You cross 28 years of age, I'll make you professor. I told him that, look, you keep waiting, I'll not come. So I was clear about it right from day one. So,
we're very glad you took that decision, sir, because you came back and you became one of the fathers of the Indian nuclear program. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much.